Hello, everyone. Just a quick note before we get into this week's conversation. We turned up without really having a subject that we were going to talk about, and so this conversation, which I was really only planning to probably put in a future clips episode, ended up being the main conversation we had. It's a little bit shorter than usual, which is probably not a bad thing. But the quality's not as good because, like I say, I wasn't expecting to use this as the episode today. And I apologize. I'm getting over a cold, so you can hear me coughing and sniffing a little bit, and I apologize for that. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you very much.
London was building it in the Victorian age,
Yeah.
right? So it was like if they want to,
Well, they had the right way over everything,
yeah,
right?
exactly. Put
Yeah.
something, okay, just move that fucking slum. Sorry, you don't want to live anymore, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like just
But putting it underground is like it's just not even close as to how superior that is. It's just not even close. And if you're gonna like, I don't understand how Stockholm, which is built on solid rock and water, can manage an underground system, yet Edmonton, which is sitting on 140 feet of dirt, can't.
yeah.
No.
Like,
Well, it's because
I
they
don't
just
get it.
because it's always simplistic. What they consistently fail to. Okay, so I think it goes back. First of all, it was like back in John Reimer days, so back in the '80s. I know there was a mantra in the city. The city would not undertake any project it hadn't saved the money for. Right, so it wouldn't.
Well, because cities aren't allowed to borrow money.
Okay, so
on the Municipalities Act, they cannot go into debt.
So then they're going to go for the cheapest project they can, and of course that's surface level. When you go underground, is the most expensive. Going up is the middle
Comparable, I
ground.
would think. At least, you know.
But
Oh, with the price of bridges these days.
Yeah.
what they consistently fail to try and figure out and calculate is what are the net. There are economic benefits to a transit system that functions at a loss, right?
Like in other.
Well,
In our it's
jurisdiction,
an
right?
economic enabler to other things.
Yeah,
So you're saying let's view transit as a public service.
yeah.
Like the post office.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's part of the efficiency of the city. Imagine everyone getting to work
Yeah.
on time and happier for it.
Just like our roads
Right.
operate at a loss.
I don't know if they're happier for it.
Whatever it costs.
You're going to be happier to get
What did it
not
cost?
having gone through the frustration.
I just remember.
What did it cost to build this street out front here?
No,
Has the city of Short Park recouped that?
probably.
How? No one's paid for it.
Oh,
You don't pay a
everybody's
toll. I didn't pay a toll.
property.
They pay for it, property taxes.
But through indirect means.
Sure.
Right? So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like your public transit doesn't necessarily have to be a money maker for the city.
Yeah.
It can be a service that the city provides, like roads.
Yeah.
That's been my
But it needs to
take
be
on
good.
for a long time.
Yeah.
Because you just look.
To an extent, though, there does have to be like the fee for public transit. I think does not have to cover the cost of its operation. It simply has to be, and this is something we're discovering now. It has to be a security guarantee, Basically, you put a fee that's affordable for working people, but keeps away the homeless, keeps away the criminality, keeps away, like right now, when you say, oh, something is free, get ready for it to become a rolling homeless shelter.
Well, actually, that's what the city of Austin figured out, and they don't have the weather issues that we do. But the city of Austin did this back in the '90s. They had a 1 cent tax per gallon of gas within the city, and they used that to subsidize a free transit system. And that's exactly what they found out.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, all the indigent were just making use of the fucking thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Using it for just shelter purposes.
Yeah.
And then it drives away the people who you want using it in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where a lot of cities are at now,
Yeah.
Edmonton included.
Well, I mean, I hear I come across the horror stories of what happens in transit stations in this city, and some of it to me is just signs of the times, like the ridiculous, like kids who are. It's almost like that gang mentality, but it's not even to be part of a gang. It's like, hey, I dare you to push someone down these fucking stairs.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of fucked up nonsense. You know, it's just, it's like a year doesn't go by when something's like
I was
mindlessly violent hasn't occurred.
About how, like our values in the society have changed. Where something like that was unheard of in 1960.
Yeah.
Or even in the 80s. I used to think Edmonton, the greatest thing about Edmonton was it was a big city, it was a
large metro area.
The cosmopolitan access of a big city, but it still had a small town feel to it in terms of crime and stuff like that. That has definitely changed.
Oh yeah, and it's changed across the board in our society where we are. I forget what this conversation was and what the example was, but it was something like that where the level of indifference that we have to one another has definitely increased.
Oh, absolutely.
We feel no commonality, we feel no sense of kinship to one another.
To me, there's three aspects that all come together on that. One is it's the self-absorption of a society that for 2 generations now has been, a generation and a half anyways, has been, again, it hasn't had to deal with hardship. It hasn't had to deal with consequences. The whole, everybody's special and different, no one is type of thing, right? And then in the social media age, it's that much more isolated. Like social skills have just disappeared. It's been to be replaced.
Do you think that there's also this is something that we're seeing a lot where young kids, teenagers, like people underneath the age of 25 for sure, are doing some really egregious and really just genuinely unkind things so that they can put it on social media and gain followers?
I think that's part of it too. And if you look back to how people, I'm going to tie a couple of concepts here together, right? But when we talked about video games back in the day, I remember I was managing a video store back in the mid-90s. No, late 90s. And started seeing games like Grand Theft Auto, kind of stuff like that, right? And so that was generating the conversation at the time. The previous iteration had been about Dungeons and Dragons, like the free
fantasy games,
that, right?
Yeah.
But how does it impact our kids? And I think again, this ties into the society. Like parents aren't raising their kids with any sort of critical thinking, being able to compartmentalize what's real and what's not real, right? So I think, and GTA I actually found a bit disturbing just as a concept, because you're going out there and
mayhem,
running people over and just
beating,
mindlessly slaughtering them.
People, with a stick.
What the fuck, right? And yes, I absolutely agree that that's what's happening, because there's a couple of examples. I remember there was one video of a disabled kid who was drowning in a lagoon in Florida somewhere, and a bunch of teenagers sitting on a bridge filming it and laughing.
Wow.
Right? And then another story that came up recently, it was closer to home, I think it was somewhere in Western Canada. And some kid wanted to buy like opioid painkillers, but was given fentanyl instead.
Now, was this from a pharmacy or?
No, like from a dealer,
Oh, okay.
right? And overdosed. And instead of sending for help, the dealer and his friends just stood around laughing at him and filming him dying.
That I can understand from a dealer. I expect that from a dealer, to be honest. And I don't think that would have changed. Even in the 90s, a dealer would have done that. Dealers are, like, they know what they're doing to people.
Yeah.
They don't give a shit. But what you're saying, like this phenomenon where the first impulse is not, how can I help that person who's dying?
Yeah.
The first impulse is, I'm going to get, man, this is going to go viral.
Yeah, and I compare that with how journalists and photojournalists over the years, photojournalists in particular, have, you know, back in the day, they used to talk about how their professional integrity was
Right.
dependent on not involving themselves.
Right.
But it was a struggle for them.
Right,
to
whereas
involve
now you don't
themselves.
hear that
Nowadays,
discussion.
well, I think from the media, you possibly still do, but the thing is, in the
Yeah.
social media age, everyone's a fucking journalist.
Yeah, and yeah, there's absolutely no question about, do I stay aloof of what I'm watching and record for the sake of posterity? Oh, hell no. There's like, that's not even a challenge for them. Oh no, are you getting this? That's the only thing they're concerned about. Do I have the right angle? Is this the right light? That's the only thing they care about.
Yeah.
And I've seen documentaries such like probably the best known one is probably The Social Network, where they talk about the dangerous. Our social media preys upon certain aspects of human behavior.
Yeah.
And it's an unfair fight because the large, like the big tech, to use a catch-all term, has a raft of, or they have access to the last 60 years of psychology. Mm-hmm. And knowing how people think, how they react, and we only have our own anecdotal experience. It's a very, very unfair fight trying to avoid the deliberately addictive nature of these social medias. What other psychological effects does social media have? And I cannot help but think, like, again, this is a logical fallacy. Wet streets do not cause rain. Correlation is not causality. But I very much suspect a link between the societal breakdown we are seeing today, the breakdown in empathy, the breakdown in kindness, and social media. The ubiquity of social media.
There's no question. I believe there is a correlation.
Yeah, a causation even, because I think, like, you spend so much time on social media, and the biggest motivating factor on social media for engagement is anger, right? Yeah. So most social media, I haven't had this discussion yet. I need to have this discussion with a couple of friends of mine who I've been arguing with this week, but
Facebook, that's their recipe to success.
But not even that. But even so, you guys know. Mm-hmm. He and I are in another chat group with another mutual friend of ours, a guy named right. There's an ex airborne artillery, right? In our group, and he was a friend of Ben's as well. And in our group, we called him because he was always kind of the worrywart kind of guy, right? Well, he's the oldest of us. He's 65 or a little older now.
Well, nobody's that old.
Yeah.
But he's it's turning into he's really starting to catastrophize everything. Mm-hmm. And so in our text chain, mm-hmm. right, he spams us daily with Breitbart and Red State links and stuff mm-hmm. like this, and those guys
shock and rage kind of thing.
And it's rage. They're and I'm gonna start when he sends those links. I'm just gonna start saying no, mm-hmm. no.
Yeah,
I'm not going because I don't click on Breitbart links. I don't unless it's something really out there that I haven't heard anywhere else.
Yeah,
I'm not even gonna look at it.
Yeah, Breitbart's really gone down.
Yeah, well, it has since Steve Bannon took it over.
Yeah.
It's had, and he's not running it anymore. He hasn't since the Trump administration, but it's
yeah.
still, it's been,
Yeah,
it's
quality is really gone.
no, but that and Red State, and here's another one he sends. I can't remember what it is, but they're rage factories. That's all they are, is they're rage factories, right?
Yeah.
So, so a lot of people, they spend, and on their right wing, like Breitbart and Rage State are the right wing MSNBC,
Yes, they are.
or pick a
The right wing CBC, the right wing BBC.
yeah, or even pick some less mainstream, more analogous site like news site, right?
Or like say Press Progress or
something like that. Yeah, exactly.
Dave Berta, something like that.
Yeah, right. So they're rage factories, and so all these people, lots of people, are spending time.
The Tayi. There's the left wing rage factory.
They are,
Yeah.
on rage factories, and so it's just, and everything is rage, and so you watch videos and you think, good, those guys deserve it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that just, and you spend all your time, right wing guy gets owned, right wing guy gets beat up, left wing guy gets owned,
Gets destroyed.
right? And then we end up with this fucking thing in Panama where this fucking guy shoots 2 protesters. I mean, they're environmental, and those 2 guys on my text chain sent me like, good, right? Are you fucking kidding me?
Did he kill them?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He fucking murdered 2 they're environmental wacko protesters. I'm not sympathetic to them at all.
No.
But you can't shoot them.
Well, I'm gonna can I be devil's advocate on that one?
Sure.
I would blame
I'm seeing you.
I would blame government authorities for this. Because you can't.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because they've abrogated the responsibility.
Yeah, you've got to expect, you cannot allow this group of radicals to harass and oppress.
Yeah, you have to force them to
population.
confine their protests to the sidewalk or something, right?
And you cannot allow them to just perpetually harass and oppress the population and not expect some kind of blowback.
Yeah. Oh no.
This was coming.
When the government abrogates its responsibility, eventually there's just going to be vigilantism, right?
When the government decides the law only applies to a certain class of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, expect vigilantism.
Well, and when that certain class of people, or the class that's not getting discipline, because it's politically and morally got the high ground. At the moment, right?
Or the government sees itself as allied with them in some way.
Yeah, when it believes it itself is not part of the problem, right? And it allows itself. And yes, I am talking about woke right now. This is the problem I have with the left at the moment. And it brings me back to what I've said before, tying again the concept that nobody's capable of critical thinking and rational discourse anymore, right? One of the 2 worst statements that's been made in the last 10 years is, the whole concept that wokeism got hold of, which was, not tolerating intolerance, right? Because they're absolutely
They're the most
100%
intolerant group you're going to
they're
find.
unequipped to deal with that conceptually,
The fact that they're most intolerant group there is.
Yeah, or that they.
like it's like they've whitewashed themselves. They've given themselves a free ticket to just declare anything offensive, declare anything intolerant.
I kind of think that was an inevitable, and I remember saying as much, at the time, like at the turn of the millennium. I think this was kind of an inevitable evolution on the left, though, in that in the aftermath of the Cold War, the left had to turn away from, had to abandon efficacy, had to abandon empiricism, and identify itself in moral terms, saying, okay, you know what, maybe what we want to do, maybe state control is not necessarily the most economically efficient. Maybe it is not going to give us the best outcomes. Like, that was the pre-1991 argument. The collapse of the Soviet Union laid that bare. That, right. Socialism, okay, fine. Socialism is not going to be the best economic system. Okay, great. Doesn't matter because it's the right thing to do. It is morally superior. Maybe it's not the best for GDP, but looking after the needy, the helpless, the disadvantaged, the downtrodden, it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter whether it costs more money. It's it's on the side of the angels. And so then that set, I think, the left on a course of viewing everything through a moral prism. And when you do that, you don't leave a lot of room for the motivations of your counterpart of your opposite. If you are morally correct, then anyone who is opposed to you is de facto morally incorrect. And as this evolved, it became morally abhorrent.
I think
that old phrase that we've had for 30 years now. Conservatives, and this is 30 years out of date, I don't think it applies anymore. But it used to be said that conservatives think leftists are good people with bad ideas. Leftists think conservatives are bad people.
Yeah.
I would change that now to say conservatives also think leftists are bad people. Both sides see each other as bad people. And that's a recent thing, I think, in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But since the collapse of the Soviet Union, as the left, the new left, retooled post-1991, by viewing everything in moral terms, I think this was an inevitability.
Well, I think you're right that might be the direction the left went. I would argue that the right, prior to that, the moral high ground was claimed by the right.
Do you think?
And it remains that way, right? Because
You think?
Well, yes, because
Well, both sides are claiming more high ground now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Both
Now
sides,
the right
but-
claims moral high ground, but I would say prior to 2010, the left or the right, everything was efficiency. Everything was empiricism.
Well, it depends on which part of the right, right?
Which part of the right.
Because if you look at the religious right, they were always claiming the moral high ground, right?
True, but were they right?
That's a good question, but
I would argue to you that the very best you could say about them was that they were very mushy, moderate, middle right. Because they shared the idea of state control was required for so many things in the so-called Christian religious right.
Well, exactly. So that's
why I would say they were not far right; they were very moderate.
well, and that's
they found common ground with the left on so many things.
You see, and that's kind of what drove me to identifying as libertarian is because
Yes.
I saw these big government people over here and big government people over here.
It's just that they wanted big government for
And
slightly different things.
this one wants God, and this one's so now those what you call the mushy guys. Those are the guys who sort themselves in the modern sense into the natcons, the guys who want,
Yep.
the guys who want to impose. Like there's a movement to impose Catholicism on the United States and completely throw out the Constitution and completely.
What's the difference
post-
between Jerry Falwell and woke? They both want to use the state to impose their morality upon other people.
Yeah.
I see no distinction.
like I said, I actually agree with you. That's where the left has gotten to these days, right? And I would argue that
left not always kind of there? Using the state to impose your will upon the populace.
I'm going to take
Right?
imposition.
Like to use it as in a classical macro view, was the left not always there going back to 1917?
I'm going to take control and imposition out of the context of this conversation for the moment.
Okay.
Right? We've actually touched on that in a couple of ways this week. But my thinking is this: that prior to the evolution that you're describing, that ultimately became woke, is that there was. My position is, having gone through it at the time, is that the left back in the day, my day,
say pre-91.
could claim a certain intellectual capacity it no longer has. So it would.
Okay, now you got my attention. This is interesting.
It would have these ideals,
Yeah.
right? But it was at least able to hold a discourse about them and have a logical path for them, right? So when you talk about the morality, because basically I agree with what you said earlier, which is taking care of the poor and the downtrodden and the unfortunate, right? Is a moral responsibility, and I do believe that, right?
Yeah, if
I
I was going to steel man the left, that's the approach I take.
What's that?
When I steel man the left, that's the approach I take.
Yeah.
Because that's the noblest, most virtuous side of leftism.
Well, yeah, and that's why I believe there's actually nothing wrong with leftism. I think that's
Right.
the whole purpose of
Yeah.
leftism, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things there's a commonality around this table, especially when it comes to Steve, and one of the things you and I butt heads over, right? Every time control comes up, I roll my eyes.
Yeah.
Right? How the left is all about control.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's such a blanket statement. Right? For me, it is a free will concept. Right? I am not looking to impose. Ideally, I'm not looking to impose anything on anyone. Right? My feeling is that, again, as humanity has progressed, and I've said this many times,
Ideally, neither was Marx.
Yes.
humanity has
And
progressed over time.
And
You know,
Mao.
we've gotten under tribalism.
Ceausescu.
Tribalism to nation
Pol Pot.
states,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
and to
Ideal.
internationalism. We've gotten to, I point out the Magna Carta and,
Yeah.
and the U.S. Bill of Rights, and the American Revolution, the French Revolution.
Yeah.
These are all steps along the path, right? So to me, again, getting back to we should be refining at all times the way to best take care of the less fortunate.
Yep.
Right? And it should be a free will thing, but that's why I feel our leadership is about encouraging.
Why
as Lincoln
why
said-
can't it be a free will thing?
That's what I'm saying. It should be, but not everyone buys into it.
So,
right?
do we need everyone to buy into it? What if enough people buy into it?
That's an interesting concept. I think. So my one-word response to that is yes.
Okay.
If enough people buy into it, how do we define? Right?
This is a
And
good
then
question.
what are the gray areas that come with that? Because
Yeah.
then everyone's going, "Well, I'm doing this, but it's not fair that he's not doing it." Right? Just because that's human nature as well.
Right. But if it's a voluntary concept. Now, if it's a coercive concept, then that's a valid critique. This guy isn't doing enough. How's it fair, or the words you're thinking, it's not fair.
Yeah.
I'm doing this,
Yeah.
and that guy's not. That is a very valid critique in a coercive environment. But when it's a voluntary environment, say, well, it shouldn't matter to you what anyone else is doing. Your only critique should be, am I doing enough?
And that's why I feel this is a perpetual debate. It's a perpetual concept. It's a perpetual evolution, right? Because there's no way of getting away from all these things. It is human nature to be.
And it is also difficult to. You're never going to eradicate poverty.
No, but you can lessen it as we
can lessen it, right? But like for example, when we go full coercion into say like something like the Soviet Union, there was probably more poverty there than there was in the United States, which had in the 1960s. If you were to compare the poverty in the Soviet Union to the United States in 1960, the United States, and I picked that time because it was prior to the Great Society and the American welfare state, there was, even at its absolute worst, American poverty was preferable in every way to the poverty of the Soviet Union. And I would also give it to you in relative numbers that the Soviet Union had more people living in worse poverty than the United States. So can we say that, look, you don't need a government-run coercive model of helping the poor. A voluntary model will give you actually better results. But how do we define, air quotes, better?
Exactly. That was going to be my response to this, because to me, everything's relative. Everything's on a sliding scale, right? So you're probably right. I'm almost 100% agree with you that Soviet Union in the 60s, probably through the 80s, poverty was more prevalent, right? And that's what equality got in the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
right? Now,
More of it and worse.
right.
Yeah.
but at least it was across the board, so everyone had it. Right?
Unless you were in the party. Like, if you were part of the
Exactly.
political elite, you lived really good.
Right. Even Joe. I remember there was a Clash movie called Rude Boy. It was a very obscure movie, but if you got it, and it was mostly concert footage, and they tried to have a bit of a storyline in it. But there's a quote.
It was just concert footage.
there-
It was one of those classic rock movies. It's just footage, man. Just concert footage.
Yeah.
But there was a line that Joe Strummer had talking with this main character, the Rude Boy Ray, and Joe was talking about how it's, the problem is now it's just different people driving around in the big black cars, right? When he was talking about communism, because Joe Strummer wore the Red Brigade's T-shirt, right?
Yeah, he was a big socialist.
As a statement, right? But so this Ray was a very uneducated character. He said, "Oh, what's that Brigate Rosse thing? It's another communist thing." He said, "No, they shoot communists."
Didn't
Yeah, because they were. I think they were Trotskyists, probably.
Oh,
So they
okay.
were, but Joe went on to say, it's because the big problem with communism these days is just different guys driving the big black limousines.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
Like
Ray was
Orwell's
like-
observation from Animal Farm.
Right, and Ray was just like, well, I just want to be one of those guys driving the big black limousine. And
Yeah.
Joe says, well, you're just part of the problem, right? That's not what we're trying to get to. But
Well-
memory. Sorry, I can't remember where I was going with this, but I mean, it is all a sliding scale.
Well,
right?
let's say we had 25 metrics and we agree on these metrics. These 25 things are how we are going to measure our effectiveness in battling poverty. And if we say, okay, let's go with a purely voluntary system. And it turned out that in head-to-head comparison, the voluntary model actually did better than the coercive model. I don't think that would change any minds on the left whatsoever. Because, again, it's about control.
See, and I push back
like,
against that. It is not
I
always,
feel that I know better than that guy what he should do with his money, and I'm going to make him do what I want him to do. That when you boil it down, when you strip away all the platitudes, you strip away all the rationalization and all of the sales, it comes down to Heinlein's observation that there are only two people in politics: those who want to control other people and those who do not. All politics boils down to one difference.
And I want to say this out loud. Well, I've got it fresh in my mind before I forget it.
That's short-term memory.
Because my experience, and love you to death, love and respect you.
But let her rip.
Here's my head scratch when I hear you say that. All left is about control.
Ultimately, yes.
Right?
If you cook
and
it
there's
right down.
I know so much better than you, right? That therefore I'm going to
Coerce you to do something.
right.
Yeah.
So here's my experience of you.
Okay.
Okay, you are very well informed,
Okay.
right? And you present things very, very, very well. You have very, very, very well thought out
Okay.
concepts, right?
All right.
But I would argue that you use the same. I'm going to call it arrogance,
Okay.
right? I'm not saying you're an arrogant
Maybe
person,
hubris.
right? So
Okay.
you've got this. You are so self-assured
Yep.
with the opinions you've got
Yep.
coming out of this knowledge,
Yeah.
right? That you also, in your own way, are forcing it to an extent. But you're not seeking to control people. What you're doing is you're absolutely 100% writing them off. You're using it as a means to allow yourself to 100% disrespect anything they do, anything they say. You just write them off.
You know what? Yeah, you're right on that. You're kind of right. I've become radicalized. Very
Well,
radicalized. Yeah.
and
And do you remember what I said earlier that in the last 10 years, I think that view, like the stereotypical view where conservatives think leftists are good people with bad ideas, but that has changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah.
I very much count myself in that I think conservative thinking has changed. And I'm going to call this the Shapiro School, because he's the first right-wing thinker that I'm aware of who started voicing this. Was that his opposition, traditionally, opposition to left-wing ideas was based on efficacy. Say, well, socialism just doesn't work. Whereas Shapiro was the first thinker, and I stand to be corrected on this, maybe there were some people doing it before him, but I think he was the first guy to say, no, it doesn't matter whether it works, it's wrong. Like, say, in terms of, say, redistribution, no one is entitled to the fruits of someone else's labor. No one, like he equated socialism and redistribution with slavery, in that no one is entitled to alienate another person from their labor without compensation, without fair and voluntary compensation. And that really got me thinking down that, when I was first exposed to that line of thought, that really got me down that other path. I do find that I do kind of write off a lot of left-wing thought. I do recognize like the steelman side of it, like the virtuous side of it, the humanitarian side of it. But the more I look at the practice, like what leftists do when they achieve power, I believe it was Douglas Forster who really explored it in his book, Why We Biting the Invisible Hand, is that it's a rationalization and that it's merely a moral excuse to soothe our conscience. That when the pigs take over the animal farm, this idea that, well, what we want to do is altruistic and virtuous is simply a way to disguise from their own conscience the idea of power.
Well, I mean, so ultimately,
I can't disagree with you, and I do recognize that, that is a real conceptual flaw in my thinking, because it does block me from honestly exploring a lot of thought on the other side of the fence and trying to understand it. Well, and it's something I'm trying to grapple with.
Well, I'm not even going to go that far. I don't think you are incapable, because you have shown yourself incapable of open-mindedness and discourse and stuff.
You mean incapable or capable?
Capable.
Oh, okay.
Right? But I do find that that's something I do struggle with sometimes, and I do have an impulse to push back against.
Well, that's kind of why I come here, though, right? Like, I do want that pushback. And you're one of the, that's why I really value these things, because you're one of the few people I can get pushback from. I do know several people who are of a leftist bent. And I enjoy talking with them because I enjoy getting their side, their take on things. But I cannot question it at all. Because the second I do, their effective shields go up, they withdraw. It's like, you're the enemy, I'm not talking to you anymore. And I would lose access to their ideas. Like, I can't kind of push back at them and say, okay, if that's the way things are really working, then explain this. Or then what's your take on that? And I would love to get their thoughts on that, but I'm going to say that this is probably because of your roots in the old left. Your position was to understand your own doctrines. I think that has long since faded. 20 years ago, that faded from the left. 7 or 8 years ago, that faded from the right. That we know our taglines, we know our talking points, but to explain them, to break them down and say, well, this is what that means in other words. This is something that has evaporated from our society. And so you're one of the few guys that I could... if I don't get your pushback, how do I know my ideas are worth anything? Seriously.
Yeah.
I could sit and I can just talk away in the shaving mirror like 15 minutes a day, and then I could get some great discourse with myself. But how do I know it's any good? Unless I have somebody sitting across the table to say, well, you're not thinking about this. Or what about that? Is there not a contradiction between what you said 10 minutes ago and what you just said right now? If I don't get that from you, how do I know what I'm saying has any validity whatsoever? So that's kind of like one of the main reasons I come here, because unfortunately I can't get that anywhere else. Like I thought I could get it off Facebook back in the day, but really you don't.
Well, here's the fun. Well,
Back in the
we've
day,
talked about this
you
before.
kind of got a little bit.
Like back in previous years when I wouldn't try and engage with people on Facebook, and I found it very unsatisfying because I didn't get any kind of it just other. Yeah, without getting into the details of which is everyone on Facebook knows what they are. I just found it really unsatisfying, and just decided to find another forum.
Well, I mentioned to you recently, then I think it was yesterday or the day before, that I just suck at responding to emails. I get so many emails every day. And I've got four or five.
I don't need you to respond. Just read. That's it, and then respond here.
But tying it back into Facebook, one of the reasons we're sitting around this table right now is because we started getting into those discourses on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And you would have these amazing, fascinating to read things.
Well, and those are what gave me the idea for the podcast. Was I would see what you would write, and I'm like, he's an audience.
Because there's no way I could respond.
Ah, shit! Now I can't use this.
Yeah, you can. Well, you already have to go back and edit out 3 names, anyways.
Yeah. You gotta delete that. Anyway.
I've been watching. I've been thinking to myself twice. I've been making sure this is recorded because I think this is worthy.
I've corrected my mic a couple of times because I thought that's what we were.
You got to fix that cord on your head, man.
Am I hooked up?
Ridiculous.
Oh, oh, nice. Oh, wait, I should have left that on.
Yes, I'm bald, except for this one comb.
Yeah, the electronic. For those listening, I put on my headphones. I had a cord dangling down the side of my scalp, and apparently it looked awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I can't remember where we're going. I think.
Well, hang on.
There are so. I think the most important point of what we discussed today is that there are no answers. Right? Everything is fucking relative.
Or as Thomas Sowell says, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something, and it's just purely based on what you were saying here. You were talking about how, like, Red State, Breitbart, they're rage factories.
Yeah.
Total rage factories.
Well, and like I've come to the point, like, when I get a text from them, I'm like... oh God.
Oh yeah, I was going to joke. This is so ironic hearing you guys say this because this is how I feel when I get shit from you guys.
No, this is like
touche.
I mean, everybody thinks like this is why we need to have these conversations. But everybody thinks that the stuff they're sharing is the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe I'm up there. So I wanted to ask you guys when I got here because I wanted to have a more deper conversation about it. This text thread that I was having these guys. Because I wanted to have a kind of an "Am I the asshole?" conversation. Because like we were, one he put out one that was this long, this not diatribe, but a little tome. Like takes up the entire screen on the phone kind of thing.
Rant?
Yep.
Yeah, a bit of a rant. Just like okay. So before Israel was the mandate. Before the mandate was this, and then none of those things, and like at every one before the mandate, not a Palestinian state. Before the mandate was the Ottoman Empire, not a Palestinian state.
I remember seeing that somewhere. I've seen that.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah. Well, maybe he didn't write it. I thought he wrote it.
But anyway, whatever. Yeah.
But they go back to all these.
It's a common argument.
He went back to like the Assyrian Empire, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, okay, fine, but that's not a good argument.
Yeah. It's not really
especially if you believe in property rights. He's like, well, I do believe in property rights. Okay, well, you got to keep in mind. So then I went to, look, in 47, the second to last Brit was on the boat. The Irgun, the Stern Gang, all these guys, they conducted an ethnic cleansing campaign against Arabs living in rural Palestine at the time, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, the Haganah, there was the Balfour Declaration. There's all these legal, and the Haganah condemned them. And later I'm like, okay. Well, how good was the Haganah's condemnation? Because the guy who led the Stern Gang was Israel's first prime minister, the guy who led the Irgun became the head of the IDF, and later it was a later prime minister. So the Haganah's fucking condemnation wasn't worth shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're on about UN declarations. The UN said, if the Palestinians should get full citizenship, if they played ball with the Jews, and they just chose not to play ball with the Jews. I'm like, well, again. Israelis were conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign in the late 40s, right? Like you can it's arguable that the 48 war was unprovoked. It was,
There's lots of blame to go around.
Exactly. And that's all I was trying to articulate. I'm not trying to say that Israel
doesn't have the right to exist.
Or that they don't have the right to try and destroy Hamas right now.
I mean, when it comes to any issue throughout my lifetime, our lifetimes, right? The Mideast, and all you have to say is it's complicated because it fucking well is.
Well, and that's what when I first proposed the thing to Lance. That's why I wanted to title the podcast. It's complicated. Yeah. But then I went and I searched and I discovered there's like 19 other podcasts called It's Complicated, so that's why we didn't call it that. But it's
there's a lot of nuance.
But so the thing,
a lot of gray area.
Here's my am I the asshole question is because basically what I'm getting from them, not necessarily I can't speak for them, but what I'm getting from them is like they're trying to simplify this thing down, and the Jews are morally right now. The Israelis are in the moral right. Okay, but to the point, but
context,
yes. But what I'm also getting from them is the Jews are within their moral rights. That as long as they don't like deliberately try and genocide Palestinian terrorists, it doesn't, or the Palestinian people, it doesn't matter how many civilian Palestinian casualties there are. Is kind of what I'm getting.
That's what you're saying, or that's the argument you're hearing?
That's kind of what I'm hearing.
Oh, okay.
Right, and like so I don't want to say that's what they're saying because I don't want to misrepresent them.
But that's you don't
what
know.
I'm getting.
Yeah, that's what you're getting.
Right, and it's just like, but that's not true. We don't do that anymore, right? And so one of the moral equivalencies he tried to draw was like that the Palestinian people. And I argued back and pushed back at this, that the Palestinian people basically, the population, the general population, held the same responsibility for Hamas that World War II Germany held for the Nazi Party.
Sure.
Right. And while I can see the equivalency, but so my argument against that was math, basically. Like, okay, the Nazis put millions of people in the field, millions of soldiers in the field, and they mobilized the entire German society for
the purpose of
the war and the German expansion and all that. At best, like Hamas, for October 7th, Hamas put 1,500 people, and some of them are just random Palestinians, civilians who weren't part of Hamas and saw an opportunity and went and behaved like barbarians. But at best, they figured it's like 1,500 to a couple thousand people out of a population of 3 million.
But Hamas mobilizes the entire Gazan population in other ways.
Yeah, but not intentional. Again, those
Hamas
people are not all willing.
Pretty total. Well,
though they're not willing.
Were all the Germans willing?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's complicated.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And to have that coming from the right is kind of like, for me. Sorry to interrupt. It's kind of like, okay, how far are we going to take this? Because we can apply this anywhere.
Right.
Now, the whole population of the U.S. is responsible for slavery back then because they allowed it.
Yeah.
Right.
Fair.
You know, and so again, how far back are we taking? Are we taking this back to Julius Caesar? He was a bit of a cunt. Are we going to tear down all of his statues? No. Okay, so we got some wiggle room here.
Yeah. Right? But even like going back, so like defeating, using the Hamas to Nazi analogy, okay, right? Mm-hmm. It's. I think you can have a reasonable argument that maybe firebombing Dresden was not a morally upstanding thing to do. It was not the right thing to do, right?
And I have had this discussion with Dresdeners.
Right.
Who have very strong feelings.
I'm sure they
imagine,
do.
Right?
When I first found out, like when I first clicked to this concept of the firebombing of Dresden, I was like, huh. And I remember, so do you remember... did you ever get the Penguin History of the World, like the little maps?
No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Right, so it comes to Volume 1, Volume 2, and I think the split is somewhere around the French Revolution.
Yeah.
But fascinating page on the bombing campaigns relative in World War II, because what did we grow up with? Battle of Britain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the Blitz, and how that bonded the British people together, and yada, right? It showed, and it just had this graph from year to year. How many bombs were dropped on Britain,
Germany,
and then how many were dropped on Germany. And the only year in which Germany dropped more on Britain than the Allies dropped on Germany was 1940. By 41, the Allies were already dropping more on Germany than had been dropped on the UK.
If we had lost Do you think Bomber Harris would have been tried for war crimes?
Oh, sure.
Oh yeah, but I mean,
Totally, he would have.
you know,
And so would
again,
Curtis LeMay,
again,
right?
sliding
Yeah.
scale because
They
you know, they would've-
deliberately target civilian populations.
Like when Victor Davis Hansen points this out a lot. When Curtis LeMay left Europe and went to and took over the air war over Japan, he literally did the same thing.
Yep.
Like he
Obliterate.
and Japan
Yep.
was even more susceptible to it than Germany was, and so
dehouse the civilian population and their industry will
and
collapse.
LeMay was actually against dropping the nuclear bombs because he figured he could. He'd almost completely obliterated Japan's civilian and industrial capacity through firebombing.
Yeah.
and
because of their wooden housing, right?
Yeah.
yeah. So Japan was especially susceptible to it, and.
Now, was Bomber Harris specifically the Ruhr Valley Dam Busters, or
No, he was in command of Bomber Command.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of behind the whole policy of his big innovations were night bombing and deliberately targeting the civilian, like dehouse the German population is what his goal was. Figured I can't bomb the factories because I'll just move the factories underground. But what I can do is if the workers in those factories have nowhere to live, then I can shut down that factory.
Well, I think because the Luftwaffe had set that standard anyways during the Blitz.
And that was also kind of
Yeah, I'm sure that's where the moral justification for it came.
like
right?
when and especially that was a very wide opinion in Britain. Like for example, there was when the Germans surrendered to Montgomery in the Low Countries and in Northwest, it was said you will have everybody here on this date and that's it. And he said, well, no, I need more time to get my men over from the Russians. And Montgomery said, you're not getting it. And he said, well, that's, basically he said, that's a pretty cruel thing, leaving, my people, at the mercy of the Russians. And Montgomery said something to the effect of, well, maybe you should have thought of that before you started this war. There wasn't a lot of sympathy.
No.
And again, there was the moral equivalency had been established when the Germans strafed columns of refugees outside Rotterdam. So, yeah, they felt no qualms whatsoever at the time.
But then the other question that comes to my mind is, were they right? Could we have won the war without doing that?
I think
I've heard a few arguments about
Yeah.
it. Without dropping the bomb?
Without Dresden, without deliberately targeting civilians, right?
No. And for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, places like Lübeck, Dresden, there were not those egregious civilian casualties because they had time to get down into the air raid shelters.
Yeah.
We obliterated the cities above them. The people came out of the air raid shelters and just found that they had no place to live.
Yeah.
Those primary exceptions were, again, because of the firebombing, it sucked the oxygen out
literally.
of those air raid shelters. Like the majority of the people in Dresden did not die from
Burns.
from burning to death.
They were
they suffocated,
asphyxiated.
asphyxiated, and smoke inhalation. So for the most part, they targeted the civilian population, but they targeted the housing of the civilian population. Yeah. So they didn't have, I guess that's, again, I'm being devil's advocate. That was kind of, from what I have read, that was the way that they were able to sleep at night. Saying, number one, they started it. Number two, we're not killing masses and masses and masses of people. Yes, some people are dying, but that's not a deliberate target. Our target is the bricks and mortar of their apartment dwellings in the city. They're sheltered during the actual event in their air raid shelters. We're just eliminating everything above ground when they're hiding there.
As to your question, so would we have won? I mean, that's...
I don't know, man.
That's an intangible.
I don't know.
I would say
their production... I mean, it was a huge advantage in that we were able to degrade their industrial production. I mean, especially with fuels.
Yeah.
Oh man, that was huge. That was huge.
The other question is, because the German industrial capacity could never equal the American industrial capacity.
No, it could not.
Could never. So it was only a matter of time.
Thanks, Japan.
Yes and no. Let's say German industrial capacity was left intact.
Yeah.
how fast could the Germans
Well,
have
but, like-
killed Americans?
Yeah, I don't know that you would ever.
And like, what's more expensive, a high velocity 76 or 88 millimeter shell or a Sherman tank? They could have absorbed that American industrial capacity.
Yeah, maybe.
Quite possible. I mean, when you look at the records from the German side,
But the,
ammunition shortages and fuel shortages are a
Yeah.
perpetual. Oh, and rolling stock, rail and rubber tired vehicle.
Yeah.
Are a perpetual concern from 43 onward.
But so imagine, okay, so there's not a scenario where the Allies wouldn't attack German industrial capacity, but if they'd never gone with Harris's
Yeah, dehousing the
dehousing
population.
them, so they'd only attacked industrial infrastructure and rail infrastructure, road
Yep.
infrastructure, and only done that, that certainly would have had a significant effect. But if they had never attacked the population or the population's infrastructure, it's the civilian infrastructure, I guess.
If you factor out the effects on the civilian,
But I mean, definitely Allied casualties would have certainly been higher. The war
Oh, yeah.
probably
Yeah.
would have been a year longer, if not two.
If not 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I mean, the demoralization of the people is the only factor that comes to. If you're setting aside, okay, whatever impact it had on the productivity of those workers,
Yeah.
at not being housed, right? But when it comes to the morale of the population at large, that to me is a big question mark, because really
It
the
has
reason
never broken. I am not aware of a single incident anywhere where bombing has broken civilian morale.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah. Well,
Not anywhere.
Germany surrendered because of the strategic situation.
Yeah, they were just conquered. They
Yeah.
were just flat out conquered, boots on the ground.
It was time
Yep.
to stop fighting.
Like
You
they
know,
had, literally, they had nothing left.
Yeah.
They literally had, every single one of their armies had been defeated in the field. They were out of ammunition. They were out of, what was it? The 56th Panzer Corps finally wrapped it up in Berlin when they had something like 2 hours of ammunition left. Like they were done. It was over.
Yeah.
Right? There was absolutely, and Hitler was dead. I mean, they continued fighting after Hitler was dead, and everybody knew Hitler was dead.
Yeah.
It was only when they realized that, okay, look, we're most of our units are out of ammunition, or they're down to their last 2 magazines, or like each individual soldier is down to his last 15 rounds. It's over. It's done. And this was the way of you could make the argument that the Japanese army still had some combat power left, especially in mainland Asia, but there was no combat power left in the Wehrmacht. Like they
Yeah.
were done.
Yeah.
They were done.
Well, and they had nowhere to operate either.
Yeah,
You know,
they had no fuel.
almost-
They had
almost
no
every
vehicles.
square mile of the country had been
Yep,
occupied.
had been occupied.
Yeah.
They had their number. What did they have? Even 50 operating armored fighting vehicles in like the whole bloody army
In the
by that
world.
point. Yeah, like going from the North Sea down to the Swiss frontier. I would argue that no, they didn't. It might even be closer to 30.
Yeah.
Like runners, that could actually move, right?
Yeah.
Most of their transport by that time was horse, so yeah, they were done. When they packed it in, they had nothing left. And like even today in the Russo-Ukrainian war, the Russians have been attacking Ukrainian urban centers from the beginning, and it is not, if anything, it steals the resolve of the enemy civilian population.
It depends. I mean, German blitzkrieg and terror, you were referring to the strafing of refugees outside Rotterdam. There was some of that going on in France.
Yep.
I mean, but all that was honed in Spain.
Yep.
You just look at Guernica.
Yep.
It was done deliberately
Yes, it was.
to demoralize.
And it was
And
believed
it did
that
work.
it would. Did it?
It did.
Did it
did.
break the Republicans?
I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to remember. I'm gonna have to go back. But either, I think
It
Bilbao-
shocked
I
and
think,
horrified them.
I think Bilbao surrendered as a result of
Yeah.
it. And
You
Bilbao
know
was
what?
strongly fortified,
Now that
but they did not want to go through that.
maybe that could be a Spanish thing, because the only modern equivalent I can think of where a civilian population knuckled under due to attacks on them was also in Spain. When remember there was a terrorist attack in
Madrid.
yeah, subway bombs or something
Yeah,
like that around
yeah.
2005, something like this.
Yep.
And Spain pulled out of the coalition with Iraq because of that.
Yep.
So yeah, maybe that's it's kind of interesting that the only two examples we can think of are both in Spain, and separated by so many decades. That's quite interesting. So let me ask you a question about these right wing alternative media outlets.
Mm-hmm.
Something I've been asking Trent offline is a level of dishonesty within left wing media. Where does that exist in right wing media?
Well,
Maybe
like
not
specific sites or like where
examples. Like, okay, let's make it real easy to say, all right, what you're saying is technically true. However, the context, you're taking it out of context, or there are other factors that you could easily mention, but you don't for the sake of pushing a narrative. What examples of right-wing media do you know of where they've done that?
off the top of my head, I cannot give you an example. But I suppose I could just look at one of these articles.
Yeah. Okay. Pull one of them up. Trent,
There was
help me out.
There was one recently, and it's going back to the past, I think. I'd have to go back and purely anecdotal.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah,
This is something
yep.
I read in the last week
Yep.
that it was being put out there, and I'm just going to say on the American right, on the Trumpist right,
Yep.
within the MAGA constituency,
Yep.
that I think what they were reporting was that Hillary had been arrested and was in jail. When in fact she obviously had not
pretty
been
clear
and
she's
was
not,
not,
yeah.
you know. But it became this talking point for a little while, and I think in more than just echo chamber circles. It got.
But say
it was-
something we're intending to deceive for ideological purposes. I remember a news story I read in The Rebel, where they were dealing with something to do with the armed forces. And it was, I don't know, it was at the time, roughly 2018, something like that. And it wasn't so much that they were trying to deceive, it's just that they completely got a factual detail of the armed forces wrong. Like the way it's organized.
Yeah.
Or say something to do with how the chain of command works. And it would have taken maybe a phone call to one person to clear that up. But instead they just made the assumption something went like that. And I thought that really, really disappointed me, because I thought that was incredibly sloppy practice. Really unprofessional, very sophomoric. And to be honest, I've really never, maybe this is unfair, but I've never really forgiven them for that. And I've never really looked to them for, I do look at certain fringe sites, left and right, because I often find that the fringe gets on stories first. Mm-hmm. And I haven't really looked to them when I want to know what the emerging right-wing perspective on something is because of that. I haven't forgiven for that. But I think that was just sloppy practice, not so much an attempt to manipulate the facts, or not so much an attempt to manipulate their audience into reaching a preconceived conclusion. But I'm wondering now, what examples, if you wanted to find that on the right, what examples would you give?
Well, it's interesting, and I'm going to start by talking about the left a bit, all right? Because I don't want to come across as completely biased here. Right? You mentioned MSNBC recently, and I've gotten to the point, because on my Apple News feed on my phone, MSNBC comes up a lot.
It's very prominent.
And I ignore them. I've gotten to the point where all I have to do is look at the headline and go, okay, this is...
Rage Factory?
Well, it's...
Shock jock kind of type stuff? Like it's intended to stir you up?
Well, no, it's more like it's meant to satisfy a point of view. It's basically... so much of it these days is about Trump. It's about Trump's in trouble.
Yeah.
Trump this, Trump that, Trump saying things. Trump
It's a weird phenomenon, right? Isn't it?
You know, And
It's
I'm
kinda
just
weird.
like, okay, Trump, when Trump was in,
Yeah.
I used to watch Colbert,
Yeah.
Tonight Show.
Yep. Like late night.
And Seth Meyers every
yeah.
night because I needed their opening act. I needed their opening dialogues just to stay sane for 4 years, right? As soon as he was voted out, I didn't need that anymore, right?
So you're going to be back to it when he gets elected in 2024?
Oh, fuck. I mean, like, how messed up do things need to be for people to be even considering that again? I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, I think it makes perfect sense. It shows an astonishing lack of self-awareness by the Democrats. It also shows an astonishing lack of awareness in the Republican National Committee. I mean, can you get a clearer message from your grassroots if you're the Republicans? Can you get a more, like, how tone deaf do you have to be to understand that what you are presenting to a massive share of the, and both parties should be looking at this, that what you are presenting to the electorate is not meeting their concerns. That I think the vast majority of Trump's support is just burn it all down rage. But
again, those are the times we're living in.
Yeah, the same impulse that makes a guy loot a store during a BLM protest is the exact same impulse that makes a guy cast a vote for Trump. It's a
It's the mirror image.
Yeah. It's just being it's same emotion being expressed in different ways. Yeah. It's a rage. It's a frustration. It's a nihilism. It's a desire to. It's also a rebellion against the elites, or are those maybe not the elites, but those who are at the top, who are thriving in the society, those who are doing well. It's a rebellion by those who are not doing well.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, and this, I think this is one of the biggest symptoms of what's sick in the U.S. right now, is Trump is the hugest example of someone who benefits from the system. And people still love him, right? They see him as the opposite of what he is.
Sure.
Right?
Maybe. I mean, whatever. I mean, I think a big reason why they love him is because of the people who hate him.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on right now.
Well, and that's what you see with like the dialogue around Ukraine, right? Like a big section of the right is 100% against
simply because
aid to Ukraine simply
because the Democrats want it.
Yeah.
And to me that is way dumber than voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Way dumber.
Yeah. Well, and now that same crew of people is like cut off all aid to Israel.
Yeah.
Right?
Just because the Democrats want it.
Yeah. Because
like can you find me a better example of just pure mindless partisanship?
Well, I mean, we've been living that for 8 years now.
Yeah.
This bad? Well, okay, you're right.
I'd
You're
say
right.
this
you're
bad.
right.
Yeah,
because the Democrats did the exact
since
same thing
since
when
the
Trump
election
was
of
in
Trump.
office.
Yeah.
They opposed everything simply because it was Trump.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go. I'm gonna argue that. Listen,
And its roots are longer. Like, I mean,
like you mean the roots of
second Bush administration. This really started right. Like by the time you hit the second Bush administration, Democrats are. I think partisanship was bipartisanship was done.
Oh yeah, totally.
By the second, right? Because there's the big bipartisan consensus in the wake of 9/11.
Yeah,
and then Bush
lied, kids died.
Yeah, all that stuff. By the end of his first term,
Harper derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was across the English-speaking world.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Jeremy Corbyn took over when he took over Labor.
Yeah.
Right. And
yes, there was a mass insanity on the left, say between 2005 and 2016.
Yeah, and now the right is mimicking it.
And now the right is mimicking it. Absolutely.
I'm going to step outside for a second.
Yeah, sure.
All righty.